Welcome everybody this morning. Hello, and welcome to Alternative Business Models and the Funding Mix. I'm Beverly Gormley, the Heritage Trust Network's Programme Manager, and this is the first of our 2022 Open High Streets events, which are part of the Architectural Heritage Fund's Transforming Places Through Heritage programme. I'll shortly be handing over to Simon Borkin from Stir to Action, who'll be leading this morning's event. But I just wanted to say a few words just before we start. For those who don't know us, and I think there are quite a few non-members here this morning, the Heritage Trust Network's the UK's umbrella organisation for those who are rescuing, restoring and managing historic buildings, structures and landscapes. And we're a thriving and rapidly growing peer-to-peer network with almost 600 members across the UK, comprising groups and organisations from tiny groups that are restoring, say, a listed signal box to the likes of the Landmark Trust. Throughout the year, we run lots of training events and workshops like this and organise opportunities for members to network and see each other's sites. This will be happening more and more this year. Thank goodness we've missed it. Over the last 2 years, we've run over 60 events for almost 1,500 attendees, and our members have said that they've never needed us as much as they do now. I won't go on too much, but I'd recommend that you take a look at our website, check out the many benefits of becoming a member and book onto our upcoming events. So just a little bit of housekeeping. You'll see on most people's screens, I think top left, if you're looking at a normal computer screen, you'll see it mentions Otter AI. And this is our live speech to text transcript service. So if you want to see what's being said, if you click on that link, it should open up another window that gives you a live update on what's being said. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. As usual, we ask you to stay on mute if possible. And if you could type any questions in the chat box too. I'll be keeping an eye on the questions and we'll be answering them later on in the session. As always, a huge thanks to the Architectural Heritage Fund and the National Lottery Heritage Fund for making this event possible. So that's it from me for now. So over to you, Simon. Good morning again.
Morning. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all well. I should say my usual laptop conked out on me with about 10 minutes to go. So I've had to improvise a little bit, but hopefully everything's going to work. But yeah, no, thank you for joining this session. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully you'll be able to see my slides. Is that appearing for everyone? Brilliant. Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about the loose title, I suppose, is Alternative Business Models and the Funding Mix. If anybody has been to, I've done a number of these sessions now, and if anyone has been to them, I sort of draw quite a lot on some of the projects that I've been involved in, and you'll hear about them over the course of the morning. But I'm actually currently doing this session from Stratford Public Hall, which is a community-owned heritage building in Manchester, which I've been involved in pretty much from the outset. And I draw quite a lot on the projects I'm involved in because I hope that actually it's useful to have the theory, but hopefully having some practice and some kind of real life examples hopefully brings it to life. So I will be talking about, I will be drawing on Stratford Public Hall quite a bit, just because it hopefully encapsulates some of the themes and around thinking about business models and the funding mix. So just to sort of extend that introduction, Stir to Action. So I'm actually a sort of freelance consultant and practitioner, and one of the organisations I work with is Stir to Action. So for those that haven't come across Stir to Action, we are a cooperative ourselves, and essentially focus around developing an alternative new economy that supports democratic business models, so co-ops, employee-owned organisations, community organisations, and we run a number of different projects and programmes, spanning training programmes. We publish a magazine, so if anyone has seen, I don't know if anyone's picked up the magazine, but it's a really good kind of quarterly magazine that covers lots of different areas around the new economy. Yeah, just wanted to sort of flag a few things that we're doing. I suppose if there are other sessions beyond what Heritage Trust Network are doing, then I just encourage you to look at what we have, the New Economy programme. So we've got a number of workshops that you can see online on the website. So there's just a few highlights. So these I thought would be potentially particularly relevant to this crowd, I suppose. Democratising the High Street coming up next week. Community Shares at the end of March, which is a short programme. Community Partnerships workshop towards the end of April, and then a community ownership workshop on the 4th of June. But all the information is on the website, so have a look there. And excitingly, the other thing that we're involved in doing is a festival which takes place down in Devon, called Sagars Mill, and that runs from the 12th to the 14th of July. So that's 3 days of workshops and other sort of activities, entertainment on the site in Devon, and tickets available for that as well on the website. So just a couple of plugs there on behalf of Stir to Action. I hope that's all right, Beverly. Just drop them in at the beginning. So I'll just check the chat and just make sure. Yeah, thanks, Beverly. I think you're covering everything. Yeah, and what I'll say is we'll have a short break. So we'll run till midday, but the intention is to have a short break around 11 o'clock, so people can get a brew and catch their breath, I suppose. So yeah, just a bit of my background. So yeah, before kind of moving into a more freelance role, I worked at Cooperatives UK. And I was quite heavily involved in setting up the Community Shares unit and the Booster programme. So I'll be talking quite a bit about Community Shares as part of the funding mix for heritage projects today. And a lot of that's drawn from my work with Cooperatives UK as the sort of trade body for the cooperative sector in the UK. But then in terms of the projects, so this I'm currently sat in this building right now. This is Stratford Public Hall. And I've been involved in I was involved in the campaign to save the building, and now a board member. And we run this as a sort of multi-purpose venue. And basically our aim is to create space for good things to happen in Stratford, in Manchester. Another project that I've been involved in Manchester that I'll probably talk about a little bit today is, if I can change my slides, is the Picture House, which is in neighbouring Chilton, which is just down the road from Stratford. And this is actually a project in development. And the idea here is we're seeking to take on the building, which you can see on the screen, which currently is the funeral care. We're using it as a funeral home. They've moved out. Prior to that, it was a cinema building. Its kind of major I suppose claim to fame is it was the venue that hosted the first ever Bee Gees performance. But our intention here is to develop this into a community-owned food hall and with a residential space. Again, looking at community investment and working with the development partner. So that's me. Before I move on to the next section, are there any questions, or people are just doing intros? Oh, is the screen share looking okay? Is it the slides looking okay? I saw that.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's fine for me.
Okay. I don't know what much I can do my end, so I'm glad it's working for most people. So yeah, just because obviously the main kind of emphasis around these sessions are obviously thinking about heritage within the context of the high street. So I just wanted to just sort of provide a little bit of context around the state of play regarding the high street and how communities are operating within that context. So a lot of this won't be new to you and has obviously been reported widely, and I'm sure many of us are, working in high streets up and down the country will be aware of the kind of state of the high street. But I just thought it would be useful to just provide that context. That obviously, even before the pandemic, footfall was declining in the high street as a result of, an increase in online retail and kind of out of town, I suppose, activities. We know that the pandemic has sort of exacerbated that decline, and there's a view that sort of the footfall may not recover to the rates that we saw before the pandemic, and actually retail itself is declining as the dominant occupier in town centres. So when we think about alternative business models, we sort of have to think about alternative offers within the high street that go beyond retail. And interestingly, the High Street Task Force actually identified that some of the kind of master plans and visions that had been formulated prior to the pandemic that probably had quite a high reliance on bringing retail into high streets may not be achievable now. One of the things that has been interesting is that kind of district and neighbourhood centres have often fared better than kind of big cities or principal, I suppose, retail zones, and that's because as our kind of circumstances have changed with the pandemic, that we're kind of staying closer to home. And yeah, I just thought I would just one of the kind of concepts that kind of has been used to kind of encapsulate this is this idea of Zoom shock. So obviously we're on Zoom now. We're all, spending more time glued to our screens and doing, a lot of our work is close to home. And as a result, that's changing the urban geography of labour. And that has implications for the high street. So, makes sense, but essentially when a person works from home, their consumption of goods and services will take place increasingly where they live, not where they work. And so that's having an impact on how high streets and district centres are operating. So just in terms of community ownership on the high street, one of the positives is that actually community-owned assets are having an ever greater role in reviving high streets. And actually there's over 6,000 assets now in community ownership, with actually a large proportion of those moving into community ownership within the last 10 years. Quite a lot of evidence shows that actually when assets move into community ownership and communities have greater control in them, they're generally more resilient. And actually the economic activity that takes place within the enterprise and around it is often more anchored within a community. So you've got this idea of community wealth building, that more of disposable income is moving within a local economy. And obviously there's been some policy interventions that have kind of encouraged this trend, Localism Act being a notable one in 2012 that gave communities a number of powers around community right to bid. Obviously there are currently, there's a sort of question mark about what's coming ahead with community ownership fund, levelling up, but generally, we have seen from time to time favourable policy conditions. That's not to say that in, certain circumstances, I appreciate that up and down the country that the picture changes. So, just in terms of how community involvement is kind of boosting, can potentially have a positive impact on the high street. One is that they, this idea that actually we're seeing more that people want to come to a high street context to enjoy a kind of experience as much as maybe just going for retail purposes. And actually community spaces are often more visible. They often serve as a destination place. They can boost footfall, which then actually benefits neighbouring businesses. There's evidence to show that actually community-led enterprises are more successful in attracting an increased diversity of high street users. That can be across age, ethnicity, and because they're community-led, they're often more open, more inclusive, more accessible. As we've said, they generally can be more resilient. Community-led organisations, they often take a wider role in enabling the high street to thrive. So the community is not just concentrating on their own asset, they're thinking about the asset within the context of the neighbourhood. And as an extension of that, shaping the vision for the high street, again, community organisations often are more active in thinking about perceptions around a high street or a locality, and then obviously that can develop into actually attracting investment and attention from other users, whether they be the public sector or the private sector. So I'll be kind of focusing a little bit around community hubs, because that's what Stratford Public Hall is sort of principally is a kind of community hub. This term community hubs can actually refer to a whole sort of myriad of different things, but the idea is that it's bringing together a number of uses within one space. Generally, we'll be focused on a building or a part of a building, and the idea of their sort of community nature is they're often led and run by the community and open and accessible to everyone. That does mean that they can be more dynamic, that their purpose will change over time, as the community, if the community is stewarding that project, then they're going to respond to the needs of their communities. So the uses and the activities that take place there might change over time. So that was just a bit of context around the high street. I've just checked the chat. Yeah, sorry, that's a good. I've just seen that point around the Colloquialism Act only applies to England. Yeah, and that is a really good point. That actually there is quite a lot of disparity between the policy conditions within the developed nations. Obviously, my work is focused on projects in England, but not exclusively. But I'm aware that there is a different context in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. And actually, I think there's some interesting things. I know the Welsh government have been quite active in this kind of work around encouraging more economic activity outside of the major cities to the core cities, and recognizing that this idea that concentrating economic activity, there's a value in sort of distributing that across the UK. Yeah, thanks, Beth. Yeah, so this program is available in England. So yeah, that is probably why there's more England centric. But yeah, definitely take your point that that there's different contexts across the UK. So yeah, thinking about alternative business models. So this is where I'm going to just talk a little bit about our experience at Stratford Public Hall. Before I do, I just wanted to talk about generally the business model for community hubs as a whole. And I've just cited a bit of work from Power to Change, which, if many of you will know, is an England-only funder as well. They specifically support community businesses. They were set up in 2014 and have a number of funding programs to support community businesses and do quite a lot of research into the community business landscape. And one of the areas that they've looked at is community hubs. And so they did a bit of research. This is a little bit out of date now. I think it goes back to 2015, but I think probably most of the trends still applicable. But actually, community hubs are a good example of where you've got a number of business models coalescing, coexisting through different activities. So in terms of the overall picture around business models and funding, the majority the grants are still a key source of funding, but actually 46% of funding for community hubs comes from earned income that's based out of activities and services delivered within a venue. And another big proportion of that is is activities and services that are maybe not delivered specifically within the venue, but the venue acts as a hub to deliver activities outside of the space. In terms of the distribution of venue-based income, a lot of these things are, are activities that we would expect to see within a community hub. So a lot of them around hiring of space, lettings, rentals. So that can be either kind of ad hoc room hire or more permanent space. So having tenants in, ticket sales, also equates quite a large portion. So 18% of venue-based income comes from ticket sales for predominantly kind of cultural events. Catering is another kind of relatively substantial bit, and you can see that actually shop retail is relatively small within that space. So you can see that community hubs generally will have quite a wide distribution of activities where they're generating earned income. So I was just going to show you how Stratford Public Hall fares. So one of the major things that we've done, and I'll come on to this, is we've refurbished our ballroom space within the building. And this has basically allowed us to increase our income through hires and rentals, but also has allowed us to generate more income through food and drink and cultural activities. But we continue to deliver services on behalf of partners, which is allowing us to sort of secure income, grants and donations for a wider suite of activities. So this is our kind of position for the current financial year. And you can see that we're still securing, we're still delivering, we're still relying on quite a large amount of grants, but these are actually, we're reducing our grant dependency, and also we're recognizing that our grants are related to kind of service delivering of services and activities, and we're also trying to diversify our income across these different funding streams, whether it's rental income. So we have an artist studio and a co-working studio, and we also host the MP. We have the NMP's office, the room hire income, and I'll come on to some of the activities and events that we've been involved in. Okay, so yeah, so just as a bit of context, and I'm sure a lot of you on the call will be, this will ring true. So essentially, the impact of the pandemic has been substantial. The majority of 2020 and the first part of 2021, most of our large events and room bookings, like weddings, were cancelled. We had to reforecast and kind of look at how we managed our finances. We did secure a number of emergency grants, which really helped kind of cover our funding while the building was closed. And actually during that period, we actually repurposed how the public hall was used into a kind of community support hub. So we're working quite closely with the local authority, which was Stratford Council in this instance, and the local housing association and other partners to deliver a number of kind of community-facing services, whether that was delivering food parcels, helping people with prescriptions, providing a helpline. So we were able to kind of repurpose the building as a kind of hub for providing support to residents during the pandemic. So basically, in terms of the kind of this is our ballroom hosting. So one of the first things we did when we refurbished, we've been hosting a number of sort of events and conferences, and we were fortunate to host in June. So just as you can see, we were still socially distanced, but host the Cooperative Congress within the ballroom space. So we've started to now increase the number of events and activities within the space. I think what's been interesting is we have seen a drop in kind of training activities as more. So, you know, today's a good example. We could, you know, if organizations prior to the pandemic would have more likely have hosted something like this in face-to-face in a physical space, but because we've all become accustomed, and obviously it's a lower cost and it's easier potentially to engage a larger pool of people, more and more of these kinds of things are happening virtually, which means we've seen a kind of slight drop in demand of some kind of training and kind of conference activity, but we're still seeing some kind of I suppose key events that are still taking place physically. And the hope, and I suppose my view is that, you know, as restrictions continue to ease, that people are going to more likely be quite keen to kind of get together physically, because I don't know about you, but, you know, cumulatively delivering sessions like this virtually, people, I think there is a bit of Zoom fatigue kicking in. So we held our first wedding in July last year, and that's been weddings are looking like they're going to be quite a substantial part of our sort of, I would say, venue hire offer going forward. And as people will be aware that actually there's a backlog of weddings, there's quite a lot of latent demand. So if you've got a venue that has like a space that can host whether it's, you know, the ceremony itself or the kind of function, you know, that does seem to be quite a strong area of interest. And obviously, you know, there's quite a lot of I suppose income, you know, it's not just providing the venue, but it's the catering and the bar that comes along with the wedding offer. We've also been, again, during the pandemic, we realized that actually sometimes it was, we had to be a bit more creative about how we ran cultural events. So, you know, primarily we would have had music and entertainment within the space. But with the pandemic, we realized actually, you know, getting large numbers of people within the building we were restricted to do that because of restrictions, but actually it provided an opportunity for us to kind of go out and take music kind of to the streets. So we in December 2020, we actually ran an event called Bring on the Brass, where we actually worked with, we were working with the Housing Association, who ran a number of residential homes, where we basically got some funding to take brass bands out to the streets and could entertain communities out across Stratford. So it's been quite interesting learning that actually, you know, your heritage building is a great kind of hub to attract people. It can also be, you know, a platform for kind of taking activities out to the street. And if we've got time after the break, I've got a couple of videos that I was just going to show that showed this brass kind of festival that worked really well. And again, we were able to secure funding to sort of take entertainment outside of the hall. Again, just using any spaces. Again, we've tried to recognise that we're not limited to the building. So just by the hall is the subway, which isn't particularly well used and isn't, you know, it was kind of a bit of a site of antisocial behaviour and just generally just wasn't a particularly nice space. So we basically asked the council if we could kind of commandeer the subway wall and turn it into an exhibition space. And we got some funding from, again, from Greater Manchester Combined Authority to basically create a new exhibition space, but within the subway. And again, it was an outside space. It was, you know, a safer space for people to come and use, but it's actually brought a lot of joy and sort of just boosted this part of Stratford. And we did this project called Stratford Wall of Fame, where we kind of did these pictures of famous, notable Stratford residents over the years. And again, that's kind of, I think one of the things that we've realized with the pandemic is, we can try and, we've got the building as a focal point, but we don't have to work exclusively within the space, and our business model can increasingly be influenced by running activities that are kind of connected to the hall, because obviously one of the major things around the hall that we do is around celebrating heritage, but we can take that out into Stratford as a whole. Sorry, I'll just keep an eye on the chat, but I will take some questions just before the break. So other things that we've done, we became a census support centre. So obviously this is a relatively occasional opportunity, being every 10 years, but again, it kind of complemented our work as a kind of hub. And basically people could come into the building, we could help people that were struggling to maybe fill in the census online, and then they could also, at the same time, we had information and other sort of support there. But again, we were able to secure some funding to deliver that census support centre. And again, just having space seems to be quite, we've had quite a lot of approaches from the council, from the housing association. They want to organise meetings, but because they have maybe smaller, more cramped meeting rooms, they're coming to us and to where we've got a bit more space. So again, I appreciate not everybody will be working with a heritage building that's got vast amounts of space, but what we have found is that having large rooms has actually been quite helpful, because people, like a good example has been the Trafford Council Planning Committee has moved into the hall because they didn't have a space where they could facilitate social distancing. And that's basically helped bring some additional income into the building. So another area that we've been working on is something called Thriving Communities. This is like a health and wellbeing project. This time we got funding from the Arts Council, and this is basically tapping into this an area around social prescribing. So the idea is that we working with other community groups and essentially running a number of community activities for local residents that link into the local NHS service and the social prescribing service. Again, recognizing that we run sessions anyway, but we can kind of boost those by linking into local activities across Stratford. Elevate is another Arts Council funded project. Again, this was around trying to increase our engagement across to with kind of underrepresented groups. So this was we have an artist studio, so it was quite helpful. So we had an artist in resident, Vanessa Scott, and then from the hall, she delivered a number of outreach and workshops and sessions, predominantly with the BME community in Stratford. And again, it's been this idea that we've been using the building more to kind of bring groups that maybe wouldn't otherwise come into the heritage space through running projects like this and accessing funding accordingly. Again, I was going to just show a couple of videos before the break but we basically been running events and activities within the refurbished ballroom. So we brought an orchestra in and we did dance classes and workshops, and so starting to run kind of, I would say, like more high profile music events within the ballroom, which again, now not only has that been generating income through ticket sales, but it's been a good boost in terms of the bar, and we built 2 new bars within the ballroom, and it's been basically able to increase our kind of food and drink offer. Another project that we've been developing has been the Poverty Truth Commission. So a number of these are setting up across England. It might be UK wide, but essentially this is working with local authorities and other commissioners to basically try to engage people with lived experience of poverty to improve services and programs that intend to work with deprived communities and communities within disadvantage. So again, we've been able to use the hall as a space to run like a commission because of having the building as a kind of focal point for those activities to happen. And then we just have our kind of regular events and activities. So Wellbeing Tuesday is our kind of day of classes. We have yoga, chair aerobics. We're bringing in the community into to come in and use the space. But alongside that, we kind of run, working with partners, we have information and advice sessions. So working with Age UK or working around, we have a digital loan scheme. We've run English as foreign language courses. We've got citizen advice, and so we've secured some funding to kind of so we run our own activities, then use them because people are coming in. We set up a small community cafe, and then we kind of layer on these information and advice sessions alongside them. And again, it's just bringing more people into the building. Another thing that we've just done is we've just launched a podcast. Now, not at the moment, it isn't generating any income as such. But again, this was around our kind of role of celebrating the heritage of Stratford. So we've set up a podcast called Stratford Island Discs. So the first episode is now available on all good podcasting platforms. And basically we're basically using the kind of Desert Island Discs format to interview residents who've lived in Stratford over time and basically capturing their memories. So it's like an oral history kind of program, but through using a kind of podcast model. And we've had a really good response to that, and we're hoping to release sort of more kind of podcasts. But again, it's been another thing of recognizing that, you know, it's a podcast, so it's not happening, you know, it's sort of not within the building as such, but we use the building to record it. We've got equipment in, we've worked with volunteers to kind of understand how podcasting works, and we've worked with volunteers who have then become kind of guests, and we're capturing those kind of stories around Stratford and celebrating the heritage of Stratford through the building. So the final bit around, so again, thinking about alternative business models, one of the things that we are looking at doing is an extension. Now this was slightly, so you can see this is the subway sort of down there where we've been using it as a gallery, an informal gallery, but we're really keen now to kind of have like a more formal gallery space. So we're looking at the idea of an extension to the side of the building, but this large, what has largely informed this was actually not the side extension, but it's the basement. So essentially we've got this massive basement that is, as you can see, in fairly poor condition. What we've recognized is there seems to be demand for kind of, what we've seen is there's demand for kind of loud and noisier. The nighttime economy in Stratford is kind of starting to grow, but we've found that there's not places where people can perform. So having like a performance space, and the ballroom is kind of a little bit, it's very large, but also we want somewhere where like young people can kind of just use it. They have a bit more freedom. So we're looking at the idea of converting the ballroom, converting the basement into kind of a series of performance spaces. It'd be like a main performance space where you can put kind of gigs on, but then also like practice rooms, studio spaces, and basically recognise that we want to engage more with young people, which, you know, we have struggled in the past to kind of get them in the building. And the idea is it's in the basement, it's kind of tucked away. From a kind of noise disturbance, we kind of keep it all low, subterranean. But one of the major issues with basement is access to the basement. So working with our architect, we've basically recognised that actually there's an opportunity to not only improve, to kind of restore the basement and improve, but is to improve access to the basement by having this additional kind of extension ground floor level, and basically open the building up and kind of green it and sort of improve the green space as well. So this is the moment, this sort of early stage. This is sort of gives you an idea of what it could look like. But again, this, what's been interesting is, our kind of drive to kind of go down this route has been informed a bit from our experience over the last year and a half, where we've kind of been more active bringing, kind of creating art and culture and kind of dropping it into Stratford, and that's been really fun. But we sort of feel there could be a demand to kind of complement that with actually having like a dedicated kind of exhibition space, and that would also allow us to break into the basement as well. So I'll just check the time because I might take a few questions, because what I'll do is I'm just going to stop my share right now. Was there any questions?
Yeah, we've got 3 questions so far. We've got Kate's asked, I'd be interested in the cost of sales at Stratford Public Hall. For example, 10k per annum income from catering wouldn't cover catering staff costs. Is volunteer delivery sustainable?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yes, so essentially we have really benefited from having an active volunteer base. And we continue to use volunteers, and we've kind of invested in our volunteer program, and we've actually been quite lucky to get funding from Trafford Council to kind of improve our volunteer program, so we can kind of really benefit from volunteers, but also help volunteers. We're putting like a training program and a skills development program alongside the volunteer program. We have kind of started to bring in casual staff too. So you're right, it has increased our costs, because we recognise that, especially for things like weddings, we recognise we don't think it's fair to just rely on volunteers alone. So we brought in and so that our cost of sales is going up because we brought in duty managers, bar staff. And the idea is that we're just trying to pass that on. So where there are more commercial events, we can kind of past that. We can incorporate that cost within those commercial activities. But when we want to do things more that are more community facing, that are more, we know we're going to struggle maybe commercially, what's quite useful is we can then rely more on our volunteer base to keep those costs down. So we're trying to strike that balance between working with our kind of a casual staff team and our volunteer team, and we are still kind of trying to work that out and get the kind of ideal balance.
Great. How much time have you got for questions before the break? We've got a couple more.
Well, the other thing was I was going to show I had a couple of videos, and I didn't know whether to just put them on now before the break, just that bring on the brass. But I can take a couple of extra questions now, if that's...
Yeah, okay. Polly asked, initially, what agreement did you have in place with your local authority before the asset transfer?
So the asset transfer was mainly inspired by a campaign. So it was to save the building. So it was basically the council had started to do some stock market testing around potentially disposing of the asset. And when the community got wind of that, there was quite a strong campaign so mobilized, we got like 2,000 signatories to kind of save the building, especially because the history of the building was that it was built for community use by John Rylands, who was like a local industrialist. So there's always been a strong association, community kind of association with the hall, and that basically allowed us to go into a negotiation with the council to kind of engage in a kind of community asset transfer process. We still had to put together a kind of business plan that demonstrated our kind of competencies and kind of confidence of raising funding. And in the second half of today, I'll talk more about community shares and how we kind of raise the funding. But we were able to basically get round the table with the council within an asset transfer process, and we had to put in a kind of bid as such, but we knew that we had kind of some political leverage because of the campaign to save it, and I think the council were very aware that if they went down another route, there would be, reputational damage, let's put it that way.
Great, thank you. And one more before you go to your video. From Alice, she said, I'd be really interested to hear how Stratford Town Hall got into social prescribing.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of these activities came about as a result of the work within the pandemic. So it was not something we were aware of, but when the pandemic hit, we were asked by the council to become a community response hub. So basically use the building as and our volunteers as a hub of activity. And so from doing that, we basically got invited into a partnership with the local NHS, PCT, and other partners. And it just basically, we were then asked to kind of become a partner within a bid. So it wasn't something that we were like particularly aware of, but it almost has been one of the legacies of being kind of working more. We've become more partner facing, and we're delivering more kind of frontline services now and working with partners. And that's basically how we kind of moved into that social. I think we were lucky because there was a social prescribing team within the North Stratford Primary Care Trust. So they were sort of there ready and asked us to come in as a partner around that. Okay, so I'm going to try and just share this video. I always forget how to, here we go. So should be able to see this. Oh, can you hear the vault?
No, there's no sound.
There's no sound, okay. Let's work out what's going.
If you stop sharing it and then make sure you click the optimize for video and sound button.
Yeah, that's right. I thought I did that. But you know what? I think I need to, here we go. If I can't get it working, then, is that working? Yeah.
No, can't hear it.
No.
It might be because you've got headphones in.
Yeah. No, can't hear that.
It looks good though.
Just okay. Well, I will try and before we finish, I'll try and work out how best to do.
Yes, it does look good.
So I'll tell you what. We'll have a short break. Should we come back at 10 o'clock? Is that all right?
Brilliant. That's great.
11 o'clock, not 10.
11, yeah.
11 o'clock.
Good spot.
And then we'll come and do the second half, if that's okay. And I'll try and work out the video issue.
Fab. See you then.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Simon.
Hello, can you hear me?
Could I just ask, I was the person who asked a question about the agreement.
Oh, yeah.
Because our council put it up for asset disposal and then are kind of talking about a lease, but it's in a much worse state of repair. And I feel like we're putting a massive risk in if we just keep investing more and more time and money.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get the lease. That's for sure. Like, I did have an exclusivity agreement talking about renewing it, but I don't think that's enough for grant funders. So we need a bridging type of agreement.
Yes, yeah. So
we're not going to get the lease within the next 6 months because we've got the commissioners in, and we need a kind of bridging agreement. And I've sort of got an idea of what it needs to be, but I wondered if you had any examples of ones which sort of mitigated risk on both sides.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, we were quite fortunate in that we went through a fairly, I suppose, straightforward asset transfer where the council, we did a freehold, transferred the freehold to us, and we were just, so there wasn't that many moving parts, I suppose. I'm not aware of any, and I see what you mean, like having something that was a kind of bridging agreement ahead while you're in the process of negotiating the transfer and the terms and conditions.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, I think there's an exclusivity or a preferred developer status one, but it's just Heritage Lottery doesn't have any templates, and really it should be the city solicitor, but I've got a feeling it's going to be down to us to write it.
Sorry, I don't have anything. I'll have a think and see if I can dig out anything that might be helpful.
Thank you.
Cool. Right. So we'll start the second half. I just saw that. So just saw Jeff's comment around that. The largest income was grants. I mean that. Just to explain that our grant income has really changed. So initially we'd been securing capital grants for refurbing the ballroom, and now we've moved to more revenue grants to deliver services and activities, and that's become quite a large part. So things like the Elevate project, Property Truth Commission. So we've made quite a strategic decision that we're going to complement our kind of earned income through the hire of the hall, running activities by running programs and projects and programs that are within Stratford, where we can secure grants alongside those. So, and obviously we are then able to, those projects and programs, they hire, in a way, it boosts our financial position, because every time we run an event or an activity, funding is coming into the organisation. Those grants are kind of sticking to the organisation through hire, through administration costs, through management costs. So, so that's kind of been a shift in our work, I suppose. But I totally understand that, trying to constantly secure grants is time consuming and can be, and actually difficult. We're in a fairly challenging funding space at the moment. So, but I think, what I would say is that if you can demonstrate, you can do like interesting and projects and programs within the community that engages people, there does seem to be, you can work with partners and access funding on that basis. So I'm just going to share my screen. So the next half is really about funding, and particularly around community shares. I'm just going to talk about. So I'll just share. No, sorry. Get onto the right thing. So yeah, I just wanted to just to explain, so this part, I'm going to talk about funding and finance in the second half. And obviously I'm mainly involved in cooperatives and community enterprises. But I just wanted to kind of like flag that actually finance for cooperatives and community enterprises is kind of the same for any business. We're talking about kind of business finance. It's just that actually the finance works the other way around, in that you're in a conventional enterprise, it's generally investment and ownership that determine how an organization works, and it will exist for profit maximization. While in a cooperative or a community organization, it's the members which is generally the people that are most affected by the enterprise, that are in control. And that means that we fundamentally use finance in a slightly different way. Now, I appreciate not all of you will be working with organizations that are looking at a community, like a community benefit society or a membership, like a cooperative model, but hopefully, some of the kind of concepts and themes around this will still be relevant. Just to think about finance, generally there are kind of 4 sources of finance, and I don't want to kind of go, most of you will be aware of this, but, grants obviously is a really important part of the funding mix for heritage projects, and are generally, are best if you can access them, because they are free and you don't have to pay them back. But actually, realistically, how much is going to be available for the organisation? Debt actually is often more readily available. Often that's from kind of typical lenders or social investors, so lenders that have a kind of social aim as well as a financial aim. But one of the things that that we're aware of, and is generally characteristic of the sort of loan space, is that it generally commits a venture to generating a fixed amount of profit to pay interest and refund the capital, and can often be quite short term and subject to security and guarantees. So all those aspects can actually be, can make it difficult to access significant amounts of debt finance. Reserves are actually, if you're an existing or an established organisation, that's a legitimate way of investing or using finance. But again, most organisations, especially community organisations or community-led organisations, aren't going to have a huge pool of reserves to draw on. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about equity investment, which is this idea of kind of flexible, longer-term investment that community organisations are increasingly using through community shares. And essentially, the idea here is it connects the investor to the organisation. And the idea is that both the investor and the organisation sort of share in the risks and the rewards. So just to talk about equity, when we talk about equity, we usually think about shares in companies. So ordinary shares is like the typical form of shares in companies, and they would generally be kind of transferable. So would be sold, if you wanted to sell your shares, you'd sell them to a third party. And generally, each share will carry one vote. So essentially, the more shares you own, the more kind of control you have in the organization. Often transferable shares is, because they're sold between people and institutions, you'll use some kind of secondary market or a stock market to sell them, but basically that's really only available or realistic for organizations, for large organizations, to sort of list in a market. So basically, shareholders in smaller companies will usually try and realize their investment through selling the whole business, but that to a third party. But again, for a community organization, that's not really viable, because essentially the whole idea is that the community want to hold on to onto the asset for community benefit in perpetuity, rather than having to sell it in order to pay investors back. So essentially, community shares is a sort of way of community organizations using equity, but kind of overcoming kind of some of those issues that we've just explained around the restrictions around equity investment. So a number of you will have probably come across community shares or maybe used them. It essentially refers to a special type of share capital, which is unique to a cooperative or a community benefit society. And essentially, it provides a mechanism for members to invest and get their money back at a later date. So community shares are kind of work quite differently to ordinary shares. So first of all, they can't be sold or transferred to third parties. So that means that they're not subject to capital gain or speculation, because the only way that people can get their money back is they are withdrawn or sold back to the organisation, subject to certain terms and conditions. So if I buy £100 worth of shares today, the shares themselves won't appreciate in value. Again, because of a cooperative or community benefit society is a democratic form of organisation, the share capital reflects that, in that irrespective of how many shares an individual invests in, they will still only have one vote, and so everyone has the same level of say and control within an organisation. One of the practical kind of benefits of community shares is most share offers fall within financial regulations. So if you're a private company and you want to do or a public company and want to do a public offer of shares, you would be caught within the regulations and would need to kind of go through a regulated process, which is expensive, quite time consuming. But because community shares aren't primarily a form of financial products, they're essentially, an extension of someone becoming a member of an organisation. They sit outside the financial regulatory system. So that basically means it's more affordable and practical for societies to issue shares, community shares, to their community. And then finally, in terms of because the shares themselves don't appreciate, societies are able to compensate their investors by paying a small amount of interest, and the overall kind of regulatory kind of position on this is the interest should be limited to what it should be. It shouldn't be excessive, essentially. So, but obviously that's a bit of a grey area. But generally, most societies will aim to pay kind of 2 or 3%, so a bit more than an individual might get within a typical savings account. But literally, it essentially provides a mechanism to provide some level of return, but essentially doesn't distract from the primary goal of people investing, because they want to see the long-term community benefit rather than a short-term financial gain. So why community shares are kind of a useful funding tool? Well, they kind of basically, in terms of capital, they provide basically long-term risk capital. Most people that invest in community shares generally, and especially in heritage projects, are willing to have willing to invest on a longer time frame than you might receive through a loan. So 5-10 years, that money might stay in. So that gives the organisation a longer period to kind of get established and grow. Another really powerful kind of, and this is something that the Stratford Public Hall really benefited from, is the leverage. So when a community invests, often other organisations and institutions and funders will come in alongside, whether that is direct match funding. So there are kind of community shares match funding programs available, or just grant funders seeing their community invested, and then they are more persuaded to contribute. Again, it's democratic. So for a community organisation, that's quite powerful. It means that there's no kind of specific stakeholders that have a greater say on how that organisation is owned or run. And the other thing that's quite valuable is this idea of kind of sustainability, in that when you allow your community to become members and investors, they're often more active and participatory, so they're more likely to actually use your services, become volunteers, and just be a more loyal customer base. So just very kind of high level, basically for organizations that want to do a share offer, the idea is you have like an offer document that sets out, the terms and conditions of the share offer. You have a business plan, which basically provides the kind of financial evidence around what you want to do as an organization, and that would have, you know, the more detailed financial projections. Obviously, your governing document has to allow you to issue shares in this way. So you generally have to be a cooperative or community benefit society, and then you'd have some kind of application form that would allow people to, you know, provide their information, and you'd actually take the investment. So just in terms of the kind of the markets, I've just taken a few of these slides from a really good report that was done by Cooperatives UK around the community shares market, that was released last year. But there's been about, so just under 600 organisations who've done community share offers, and the vast majority of those are still trading. And they've raised just over £155 million through community shares from over 100,000 investors. And actually, for every pound invested in community shares, nearly another pound generally comes in through grants and loans. So that leverage factor is quite is generally, you know, is quite powerful with community shares. So just in terms of like the typical community shares investor. So again, this report that was done by Cooperatives UK kind of provided some useful kind of, they did an investor survey. And what was quite interesting is not just, you know, a community share investor isn't your kind of typical kind of high net worth investor, but actually is you know, has slightly different characteristics. So a good example was there's a much higher proportion of female community shares investors compared to what we call, so we use like angel investors as like kind of sophisticated investors that invest in kind of commercial businesses. And there's a much higher proportion of female community shares investors. Again, while, you know, we recognise that people from very deprived communities are probably less likely to be able to invest large sums of money, actually the average, you know, over 50% of people that were investing in community shares earned less than 35,000, and 52% of investors didn't know their net worth or assumed it would be less than 250,000. We are aware that actually the majority of community shares investors are white, so there's recognition that actually, you know, the community shares market isn't particularly diverse. And I know Cooperatives UK and Power to Change and organisations are trying to promote the model within other communities. But one interesting thing, there's been a bit of work which has been identified that community shares are Sharia compliant, so they're actually compatible with like Islamic finance and some and the terms around Islamic finance. So again, there's some work around kind of engaging communities, so Muslim communities, about potentially using community shares to invest in community organisations. Majority are university educated homeowners, so again, maybe more typical of a kind of an investor. We are aware that actually the majority of community shares investors are older, which again maybe is reflected that generally older people will have a higher amount of savings that they can invest in community shares than younger people. Yeah, and basically this community share offers are generally quite distributed across the UK. You can see that probably the largest area is the Southwest. 30% of the share offers taking place in the Southwest, but actually, you know, there's quite good coverage across the UK. Oh, sorry. And then, you know, just in terms of the kind of the building blocks for doing community shares, often it comes from a community, you know, either a community of interest or a community of geography that kind of come together around a shared community purpose, and that often can be a place or an asset. So it has been, it has been used quite a lot around heritage. So communities raising community shares to save or renovate heritage buildings. Just in terms of how community shares works, often you would have 3 targets. So you'd have the minimum amount, which basically is the amount that the organisation recognises is if they can't raise that amount, then the project can't go forward, and so people's investments are returned. You'd have your optimum amount, which is often a higher target, and this is where the kind of funding mix comes in. So the idea is that you potentially would complement your community shares with other forms of funding. So if you don't raise so much community shares, then you can bring in maybe another loan or another grant, and then you'd have a maximum amount, which is the amount. So basically, because you have to pay this investment back in the future, it makes sense not to just take a limitless amount of community share capital, and so you'd set a maximum amount as well around the share offer. Sorry, I've just realised that. Let me just come off there. There we go. So in terms of the withdrawability of shares, so basically, as we said, that the idea is that societies will work towards paying back those shares in the future. Most societies will suspend shares for a period of up to 3 years. So irrespective of how their trading performance, investors can't get their investments back within 3 years, and then they will provide some kind of facility to pay investors back on an ongoing basis. That could be through actually running an open share offer, so attracting new investors to pay back old investors, or building a kind of capital pot over time from trading surpluses. And I'll talk a little bit about the Stratford Public Hall's kind of experience of raising shares and our plans around paying investors back. So essentially, so I'm just conscious of time as well. So this is a good example of Stratford Public Hall. We ran our community share offer in 2017, and this was to essentially renovate the ballroom, our ballroom space. And this is a good example of this funding mix where we had different minimums. So our minimum was 200,000, and we were able to access match funding through something called the Booster Programme, Community Shares Booster Programme, which is still available for applications. It's been running for a number of years with funding from Power to Change. So we set a minimum target of £200,000 because we identified our costs around the ballroom and realised that we could renovate it to a sufficient quality with 200,000. But our optimum target was 250,000. So we were hoping to get £150,000 of community investment, which would, so the match funding was restricted at 100,000. So we couldn't access any more than 100,000. So we'd have to increase the level of community investment. And then our maximum was 300,000. If we raised any more than 200,000 of community investment, we would stop there. So this basically we raised £155,000 from what I'd call community investors, or community, and also some were local organisations, which we raised. So Trafford Housing Trust, in fact, the Architectural Heritage Fund invested from local businesses. So once we'd taken that kind of local organisation funding, we had just over 684 kind of resident investors, and just providing, 790 community investors. That's right, we had 790 community investors, and we're just showing you the kind of local level of investment. So we are based in the M32 postcode, and the majority of about 2/3 of our investors came from the immediate postcode. And then all the other, then the majority came from neighbouring postcodes. So in total, 87% of our investors were from the immediate area of the 790 investors that invested. In terms of the amounts, the average individual investment amount was £160. But we had quite a spread. So I'm hoping the next slide will, sorry, just bear with me. There we go. That's just gone. Here we go, this is the slide. So £160 was the average, but there was quite a spread in community investors. So 66,000, which was equivalent to 52% of the community investment, was between £90 and £190. The majority, our minimum was actually £100. But we had a few people that had already put £10 in, so we'd recognise their initial £10 membership share. So the majority did come in at that £100 that mark, and as you can see, as the amounts increased in value, the investment amount went down. So we had, a good number within £200, £250, and then just a handful at the kind of £1,000 plus £1,000 plus mark was much lower. And actually, we also did a kind of instalment scheme, and where people could invest. So rather than paying £100 in one go, the minimum, they could pay £25 over 4 months. We had about a third of investors invested on that basis. So that was quite a well-used funding tool. So I just, sorry, that was just my slides have gone, because moved on to a different computer. My slides have gone slightly out of sync, so just bear with me. Yeah, so was there any questions just on while I'm trying to get my slides to rejig themselves? Was there any questions at that stage?
Tom's just asked, how did you capture your investors? Now, I'm imagining a great big net from that question.
A great big net?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was good. That was a good question. So basically, we did a lot of kind of local marketing. So we did flyers, we made videos, and we were like, we kind of went to the local park run, went to the, just kind of were very visible during the campaign, and managed to get some local media as well, which was really helpful. That would just then build some momentum. So I think we had like a share offer launch, and within like the first week, we'd raised about 30,000, and then it just slowly kind of ebbed away. And then we we then kind of managed to build a bit of momentum towards the deadline. Obviously, people love a deadline. So our share offer was open for 2 months, from February 2017 to, well, 3 months to the end of, 2 months to the end of March. And it was in that last week that we just started to see like people kind of mobilize. The match funding was really helpful as well, because we could basically, the totalizer was just going up quite quickly, because for every pound of community investment came in, we could reflect the match funding up to 100,000. So that was, yeah. Yeah, I'm just looking at the questions now. Oh yeah, so how, sorry, yeah.
Go for it, Simon.
No, I saw, so how can a charity make use of community charities? Well, that's, yeah, it's a really good question. We're actually, there's a number of ways that a charity can kind of look at community shares. One of the things we've done is we've actually, so a community benefits society can register as a charity. So they can act, they're not, it's what's called an exempt charity. So it's not regulated by the Charity Commission, but it's recognised by HMRC as a charity. So what's quite frustrating is you don't have a charity number. So sometimes, you know, you have to kind of talk to funders to say, we are a charity, we're just an exempt charity. But we do, you know, primarily benefit from the kind of, the big kind of fiscal benefits. So we don't pay corporation tax, and we get other, we can claim gift aid and those kind of things. So a charity can use community shares if it was to convert to a charitable community benefits society. So that's one kind of mechanism. The other mechanism would be to set up a society that then has a relationship with the charity. And so the society, there are examples that where you've got a kind of subsidiary. That obviously is a bit more complicated, but basically the society is the kind of community partner, and then that can do a share offer and build, and the charity is then still kind of the registered charity is still part within that kind of group structure. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, let me just scroll back up. Lindsay has said, have you got any idea of the amount of time and resource you had to provide to generate the sale of shares?
Yeah. So again, this is something that was quite fortunate about the booster program, and is that we got a development grant of £10,000 to help us develop, like put together all our kind of, write our share offer document, help us with the business plan, produce some videos, and like put together, like design the prospectus and that kind of thing. So that £10,000 was that we spent all of that, and that was ideal. So that I would say, you know, we raised 250,000 in total, so 150,000 community investment plus the 100,000 match. We, in terms of like the time, so £10,000 of kind of development funding to get to raise £250,000, that was just about right for us. In terms of timing, yeah, we probably started preparing it about, like realistically about 4 or 5 months before the share offer launch. But we were definitely kind of, you know, like it was a bit pressured. We could have done with more time. But we just, yeah, we just, because of the booster program, our grant meant that we had to launch our offer within a certain period. But yeah, I think that there are still development grants available through the booster program, and you're right, the AHF. So while our development grant came from the booster program, I know that AHF, you know, their project development grants, and they can sometimes cover share, you know, doing some of the work that will then inform a share offer. Yeah, I just saw a question about tax relief. This is a really good question. So Hugh, I think, put a question around, were we eligible for what's called social investment tax relief? So unfortunately, quite a lot of heritage projects and building projects, if they rely on rental income, aren't eligible for tax relief because it's not recognised as a industry or trade by HMRC. So we weren't eligible to access SITR because our business plan recognised that the majority of our income would come through rental income and room hire. So if you've got a project where room hire and rental income is nominal, I think it has to be less than 20%, then it is possible to then offer tax relief on your shares, which can be another incentive for people to invest because they can reduce their tax bill accordingly. So I sort of managed to dig out, I had just a few other slides, but if there's any other, is there any other questions?
I've got a few questions from earlier on, so I don't know.
Yeah, let's take those.
Okay,
right. I want to make sure that we've got time for questions and then.
Okie dokie. We've got one from Gaynor, who quite a while ago, she said she's very, very interested in working with a developer. How did you select your developer and what are the pros and cons? That's a massive question.
Okay, so, well, this is probably quite a, I can probably talk a little bit about the other project I'm involved in. So in terms of the developer, so with Stratford Public Hall, we've not had worked with a developer. We've worked with an architect and contractors, but we don't have like a development partner. So we've sort of stewarded the development work within the building. We've found that to be that's worked for us. We found a good architect. I'm in Buttress, who I know a Heritage Trust Network. They've a member, is that right? Associate member? Or
Buttress are a partner,
partner. So we worked with Buttress, and they've been, we're a great partner in kind of helping us with the renovation plans. In terms of development, if I just this scheme that I'll just share quickly. The Chilton Scheme, the plan is to work with a developer. So the Picture House, this is a really massive scheme. So we've identified it's probably going to be kind of £8-9 million to bring this building back into use and also develop the residential at the rear of the building. So we have chosen a development partner to work with on this scheme, and in terms of how we've done the kind of the mechanism by which we are planning to do that scheme. The idea is it will still use community shares, but the way it will work is that the Chilton the community organisation is actually a land trust. So the idea is that the land trust is going to own the freehold, and we're going to raise community shares. So we've done the intention is to raise £500,000 to buy the freehold of the building, and then immediately offer a long lease to the developer with covenants around how we want the building to be developed. So in terms of the uses that meet the community needs, and the developer then using that with that long lease can bring their own finance to the table and develop the building and the space. What it means is a slightly different, like the community has a kind of arm's length relationship with the scheme. It means that we've saved the building, we've kind of baked in community use, but we won't be directly operating or managing the scheme. What we will do is we will have income through both a ground rent from the lease, and the intention is we will run and operate a community space within that development. So obviously that's quite a different model. And in terms of identifying a development partner, that was really about finding a developer that shared our aims and vision around it being a community kind of led project. They are local developers, so they've got quite a lot of kind of links into Manchester and Chilton. So there's that kind of reputational aspect that, you know, they're not just kind of flying in, and they don't have any kind of association with the area. Also, they just had a track record of delivering kind of equivalent schemes. So that was kind of how we kind of identified them as a preferred development partner. It's just based on those factors.
Brilliant, thanks. I can't stress enough as well, if anyone's looking for a recommended, someone who's going to provide the service for your project, do check Talent Bank on the Heritage Trust Network website, because everyone on there has been recommended by other members. Okay. So you can really, you know, trust they're going to do a really good job. Ivan's just asked, what was the population catchment area to get the 100,000 community?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So Stratford's got like an overall sort of population around 50,000 is kind of like within like Stratford and the surrounding areas. In fact, I've got this, let me just, sorry, because of my computer dying, I feel like my slides have gone completely haywire. But if I just share this, this slide. So yeah, this kind of community building campaign, we use this tool like this pyramid, whereby you kind of start with your overall community. So that in our case was around 50,000 people that potentially might be interested because they're local. We recognized it was going to be a local offer, people that, you know, had some association with the hall. And then basically you then, from that community, you try and build an audience. So an audience is basically people that know about you. So they might not be particularly active, but at least you want to like build some awareness. So we, through kind of like social media and getting like the website and publications, we think we kind of engaged around 10,000 people through our kind of share offer campaign. So already you're kind of, the pyramid is kind of, as you can see, you're kind of going down lower and lower. Out of that, we kind of, supporters are basically people that have like, you know, an audience is they just are aware of you. And then you're then trying to convert those people into supporters. So basically they're kind of giving you some contact details. They're basically saying, I'm interested in what you're doing. I'd like to be, you know, I'd like to be updated. And from that kind of overall audience, we got about 2,500 people kind of on our mailing list on social media. So we could then kind of engage them more directly. And out of those 2,500, 800 eventually became members invested. So that's what kind of shows you the kind of like that kind of campaign, that kind of ladder of engagement. But now, you know, in more rural, I would say that, you know, we had to go out to quite a large pool of people because in an urban environment, I think you've got a more kind of transient kind of population. But obviously in a more rural context, I think you would potentially convert more people into being members and investors because one, you've got a smaller population base to work with, and two, generally, the research has done is that generally in rural areas you've got a more kind of a stronger kind of community identity, which means that you potentially will have more success in converting people into becoming supporters and members. Is there any other?
There are. Hanneke said, Simon, did you offer any special rewards for businesses investing in shares?
No, this was like a really interesting one in that we struggled quite a bit to engage businesses to begin with. And I think one of the reasons was because they didn't, you know, whereas a resident could see, like, it was maybe like a clearer kind of like, you know, all our kind of marketing, and it was very around like the local community, like becoming an investor, becoming a member. And I think we just wanted to extend that kind of proposition to businesses and actually then become members and investors. And I think businesses were maybe more reluctant because they felt like, oh, does that mean I've got to like turn up at meetings and agent? Do you know what I mean? Like they liked the idea of the project, but were maybe more hesitant around investing as it. So we may basically only, I suppose what I'd say is the businesses that we were most successful engaging, or kind of I'd say less businesses, more organizations, are kind of anchor organizations. So like the local housing association invested, the local cooperative grocery co-op, Unicorn Co-op in Chilton invested because they kind of understood, you know, they did get it. So yeah, I think in hindsight, having a kind of dedicated business proposition that is probably, we would have been more successful. You know, whether that had been putting their name on like a sponsors wall within the building or something like that, I think. So actually just translating the kind of community share offer into a business context, because businesses and legal bodies can invest in community shares. There's no kind of limitation on them investing, and they can still, you know, they would be treated like a member like anyone else. But we just found that they were less kind of, the whole kind of campaign wasn't as appealing to the local business community as it was residents.
Great, thanks, Simon. I've got two more questions.
Yeah.
If you want those now.
Yes, yeah, go on then.
Judith said it would be good to know of any community shares match funding programs, if you have details, or if anyone else that's attending.
Yeah, so the main one is the Community Shares Booster, which we accessed. Sorry, that's not even I'll put that in the chat as an actual link. That is the sort of primary match funding. So it's got a new, there we go. But I know that you know, other funders are looking at matching, and I know that, you know, Architectural Heritage Fund have invested alongside it within share offers, so that, you know, other funders will invest in share offers where they're supporting them as through other means, but that's the one dedicated match funding program, as far as I know, for community shares.
Fab, thank you. And we've got a question from Alice, who's interested in the idea of whether in less prosperous areas, whether they can have national offers that bring in finance from wealthier areas.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I think, again, I think that's about thinking about the terms and conditions of the offer. So I know a number of organisations have tried to blend getting, and again, this comes down to the minimum. So basically, a share offer often will set a minimum amount. And one of the reasons for setting a minimum is because obviously because if you've got a certain target and a certain number of people that you think you can engage, that generally informs a minimum, because if everyone only puts in £10, £20, then it's going to be a real struggle to kind of reach your target. And it is interesting, like analysis of community share offers. And again, this is probably like linked to kind of behavioral economics more generally, that often people will invest near the minimum because they sort of recognize that they can become a member, they can become an investor, they kind of get the benefit, but with like the minimum kind of outlay. So what often organizations have done to try and kind of make sure that the share offer is inclusive, they will often offer a lower minimum for either postcodes. So if the organization operates in, so Stratford's interesting because we're quite a mixed community. So some areas are in like traditionally the lowest IMD, you know, lowest 20 to highest 20% deprivation. But then we kind of, we rub up against areas of quite of affluence, like, you know, quite typical of like sort of urban spaces. So some organizations have identified certain postcodes, so residents from certain postcodes can basically invest a lower amount. And then, you know, within your marketing campaign, you can then go out and kind of then try and engage, you know, a more national kind of social investor base. And to be honest, that's where we didn't work with a kind of platform. We ran the offer ourselves because we knew that the majority of our investors would come from the local population. But there are kind of platforms, some of you may come across FX, which is a kind of social investment platform, and they have a kind of, you know, like a community, a tribe of like social investors from across the country that are interested in investing in kind of projects like, you know, socially motivated projects, basically. So they can basically often help organizations reach a wider investor base beyond their kind of local population. So any other?
I haven't had any more in the chat box, so I don't know if you want to throw it open.
Yeah, is there any other? Otherwise, I might just finish on the film because I feel like to start something at 10 to 12 is probably slightly dangerous. Oh, yeah, John?
We are at the very earliest stages. I might say we've got a property that's owned by our local district council, on which we've got 25-year lease remaining on it. We've been running into issues around the affordability of the rent as a consequence of the huge drop in income through the pandemic. Yeah. And in discussion with our district council, they have put up a proposal that we are now at the very earliest stages of investigating, which is for our town council to invest in the property. I suppose we mean buy the property off the district council using the Public Works Loans Board as the source of finance. I mean, there's some complex discussions to go on regarding the value of the building, regarding how much investment we have already put into it, which in terms of cash and volunteer time is equivalent to about £500,000 in my estimation. With a building that at the outset, the council were looking to get something in the region of 700,000 for to be redeveloped. I don't know whether you've heard of that sort of thing happening elsewhere.
Well, I am aware of, so the ability for kind of local authorities to be able to borrow money at more favourable rates through the Public Works Loan Board is, yeah, I'm aware that is an option, and often I think there are some examples where the councillor has facilitated borrowing through that means. Obviously, it becomes complicated because often, these projects where the community, if you're basically in terms of how that interacts with community shares, what's really important within your business plan and your share offer is how the community shares sits within the funding mix. And if you've got borrowings, how will that impact the payback period or the payback terms within the community? Because obviously, generally, the loan provider is going to be kind of higher up the kind of pecking order in terms of payment, because there'll be a more kind of fixed payment schedule. Whereas with community shares, it's up to the board to decide the timings and the level at which people are either paid interest or get their money back. So I think, you know, working with your, like with the town council or district council to potentially access, you know, because that is probably, in terms of borrowing, it's probably, you know, there isn't really commercial loan funding that, you know, it's very low interest and long-term patient capital. So it is a good source of funding. But you have to, if you were thinking about the community raising funding and taking some kind of stake within that building, then you'd have, you know, there's obviously a bit of work to think how those two would work together. I'm sorry I can't be a little bit any more kind of detailed.
Yeah, no, I think you've outlined some of the issues that we're recognising are going to have to be resolved. But one of the further points that was made by the district council leader was that because the building has been declared a community asset as part of its acquisition, the acquisition process of getting the lease on it, there is apparently an option for the town council to subsidise the cost of the loan to us, you know, as well.
Yes, yeah, of course.
It would be legal for them to do that. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think I would say just, you know, keep those conversations going but you know, I think, you know, the benefit of potential, you know, as you said, like in terms of the business model and the business plan, building some kind of community, you know, investment or membership can just, you know, you're saying that can often help in terms of generating more interest in how the building is used, and kind of, you know, I think you said that you struggled to kind of to generate the level of income within the building.
I might say we were on a track pre-pandemic that we would be turning over now a sufficient sum to be able to afford the rent that was set in the lease. But because it was an increasing amount of rent up to a point now. And the problem is that we're practically being knocked back to starters again in terms of building income.
Yeah. No, I see. It's I mean, yeah. I mean, maybe it's. I think nobody's going to share my details, so I'd be happy to have, like, I'm conscious that we're hitting 12 o'clock, but I'd be happy to talk a bit about that in detail, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the comments. Yeah, there's some really good comments coming in. So, okay, yeah, public welfare is an option in some groups. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, is there any other, or should I just leave people? I was really keen to show this video, so I might try and do it again if people are happy to.
If you're planning on playing us out with the video,
yeah, can play it out. Can we do that? Yeah.
Can I just say just a couple of words before we go? I just wanted to say that there's been some really, really useful information in the chat box. And if anybody wants to save all that information, if you go into the chat box and click on the 3 dots, that's how it looks on my screen anyway. They'll all be different, won't they? You get the option to save the contents of the chat box because there's been some great stuff in there. This has been recorded, so over the next couple of weeks, it will be on the website and on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it back or share it with any colleagues. I'd say as well, look out for a feedback form that you'll be getting this afternoon from us, because if you've got any suggestions for other topics and other events you want us to run, put them in the form and we'll take a look at them. And don't forget our new network day on the 23rd of February. Have a look at the events tab on our website. But thank you, Simon. That's been absolutely brilliant.
Thanks, everyone. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was a little more challenging than normal with my laptop dying with moments to go, but I think we just about pulled it together. So thanks, everyone, for your patience. And like I say, we'll share slides and things. So, and if anyone has any other questions or queries, I'm always around to pick those up.
Fab. Yes, just send them to me and I'll forward them on.
Right, let's try this out then. So this is the Stratford Bring on the Brass take 2.
Brilliant.
Right here, right now, 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 right here, right now.
You've set the bar high now, Simon. I don't think we've ever been played out of an event with something as funky as that.
Oh, sorry. Hang on, I've just got something playing. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that.
That was brilliant. What an ending.
Cool. Yeah, well, I'm glad we managed to make it work eventually.
That was great.
Great. Okay, well, thanks everyone again.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you again at another event.